All right, so hi, Ms. Cope, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. So this is our post-conference. Had an opportunity to observe you as far as that amazing lesson that you did on simplifying expressions with our fifth graders. So I just wanted to just review your feedback, give us some opportunities to just engage around what you actually did as far as the planning, how did that look in the execution, and then some areas where we will talk about reinforcement, things that you did great, and then also maybe one or two refinement areas to just stretch your thinking and your instruction to the next level, okay?
Okay.
All right, so again, we talked about, or you modeled a lesson on simplifying expressions, okay? Your objective was I can simplify expressions with up to 2 levels of grouping with parentheses and brackets. Now, was this the first lesson that you guys engaged in?
No, so we had built up throughout the week. So we started, this was on a Thursday. We started Monday by just doing addition and subtraction, multiplication, division without brackets or parentheses. And then we brought in 1 level of grouping on Tuesday and talked about parentheses. And then we had started talking about the 2 levels on Wednesday. So this was just kind of like the culminating, like you've done it with grouping, without grouping, like we're putting it all together and preparing them because on Friday they were assessed over the content.
Gotcha. Which is how I saw you brought several opportunities referring to the anchor chart on the prior knowledge from those days that you had introduced the learning and build up the concept of how they should go through the order of operations. And I also learned something new too from the last time that I actually taught that there is a process now that's a little different. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, it still essentially follows like the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, but they're like students hold misconceptions that like because A comes before S, they have to add before subtract, or they have to multiply before they divide. So the HISD documents explained that really if you talk about it in levels, so like level 1 being just your parentheses and brackets, level 2 being your all of the multiplication and division in any order from left to right, and then level 3 being addition and subtraction in any order from left to right. So I had students who would call it, they're like, we're doing PEMDAS? It's like, well, yes, but you know, this is why we explain it this way. And like the student that actually brought it up to the class on Monday, he was like, oh, are you telling us about PEMDAS? Like I did an example with them and he was like, I think you did it wrong because you forgot to add before you subtracted. And so I got to pull out right there like, well, actually that's why we don't call it PEMDAS in here anymore. So yeah.
And I think that was great, a great move as far as having that anchor chart present. And the biggest piece is that they are supposed to go from left to right as opposed to the traditional in order of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Okay. Well, I can definitely tell that you plan to actually address that misconception just from, I guess, our learning of how we initially learned it, and also just thinking about who potentially may have been exposed to that prior to the 5th grade teach. So great job there. So just thinking about the actual lesson overall, in our conversation in pre-conference about your lesson plan, how do you think it went?
I think it went pretty well. I think that the students were able to mostly answer the questions, and the students that didn't understand, I was able to identify that and know who I needed to work with more on the concept. So I think it flowed pretty well.
Awesome. And I also noticed that you took my suggestion in our pre-conference about the monitoring and adjust piece, where, you know, we had that conversation about once we got to the elaborate phase, once you did that quick check, you know, what would you do if students did not get it? So talk to me a little bit more about what you did as a facilitator move.
So I had a list in my head of students, or not in my head, sorry, I had a list on my backboard over by my small group of students that I had planned on pulling based on their Wednesday exit ticket performance. And so I was watching as they were doing the whiteboard activity and as they were solving the problems to see which students were understanding it and which were not. So I was quickly taking, like, I had a little notepad at my desk and I was taking a running roster of who's still struggling with these and who's getting them. So I was able to take some of the students that I had planned on meeting with at my back table off of my list, and add some students that had not been, or I think for the most part, the ones who were struggling were the ones that also struggled on their exit ticket. But like, I was able to kind of look at that. It's like, okay, I still want to meet with these, but these guys, like, y'all can go and do your station with your groups, and I can focus on the ones that are still struggling today.
Exactly, and that's what I saw. I saw right there, right when you get ready to release students, that you told 3 of them, okay, you guys did fairly well today, so I'll go ahead and release you to A, B, and C stations, and then you actually called 3 of the specific students to replace them. So I saw you right then and there actually monitor and adjust based off of the feedback from that lesson, so great job. And that's one piece that I want to, I guess, highlight as our reinforcements praise and feedback, because by doing that, what do you think was the impact on instruction for that day, especially with those 3 students that you added to your group?
I think that it really, I think that it made it to where the students that were struggling, like, they were able to get that extra help instead of still just sitting in that struggle phase, especially before I released them to their exit ticket after stations. Like, they're able to get one more, kind of sit with me and figure out where the misconceptions are and where they're doing things wrong before they're released to do it on their own again.
Exactly. You provided them immediate feedback that otherwise, if they waited a little longer, they would have continued with struggle, right?
Right.
And of course, we want to give our students a certain level of struggle, and we call that productive struggle, where we're scaffolding instruction, not giving them the answer, but still, I guess, kind of focusing them in the right direction, questioning them until they actually finally get it.
Right.
But being that you saw right on their faces, and I did too, that they were just like, okay, I don't even know what step I kind of messed up on, and I don't even know how to get to the right answer. You immediately adjusted and saw that in their eyes as well, and decided to pull them in to give them some additional support. So once you pulled them into the small group, how did that go?
It went pretty well because we were able to think aloud together. I think with that group, one of them does have some calculation issues that we're addressing now through 504 and possibly an IEP. But the other ones, I think it was really just they're not thinking through the levels and the steps in their head as they're going. Like, they kind of rush through it. Like, the calculations weren't hard. A lot of it was basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. But they are just, especially when you get those multiple levels of grouping, like, we're working inside out and then left to right. And so it's just a lot of processes for them to think through on their own.
Gotcha. And I'm glad that you were able to identify that, and I think that was beneficial for the students, once again, to get that immediate feedback to support their learning. So again, that's a precise praise, but once again, a reinforcement area that I want you to continue doing. Continue to use your strategies as far as your running roster and adjusting instruction, basically gauging the room to see, hey, do I need to go any further, or do I need to stop right here? Is this something that I need to address whole group based off of my data from my running roster that I'm taking? Or is it just 3 or 4 or 6 students that I may need to make a note of and then come to once we get to that elaborate station or workstations time frame? So continue to do that, because I know that your students will definitely benefit it. And honestly, that's going to keep you with some nice brown hair in your head and not stressing out. Because the more that we can address early on, the better it's going to be as far as our data later on, and also student understanding, right?
Right.
Okay. So along with that, as far as our reinforcement feedback, I just wanted to also give you some additional praise just about how I felt the lesson went overall from the bird's eye view perspective that I had. So definitely, I saw that in comparison to the lesson plan, to your execution, that you really followed your lesson plan throughout the entire cycle. The lesson really flowed and allowed you guys to engage in what we already know from previous learning, prior knowledge, and how you activated that with the anchor charts. Loved the mix and mingle strategy that you used from Lead 4. Want to give you kudos on that. Just taking, hey, let's look at these 2 sample scenarios of how these 2 students, according to that word problem, with Jordan and, Cameron and Jordan. Yeah. And how did they solve it? Did they solve it correctly? Who got it correct? And then what was that process to how they got it correct? By you engaging them in that mix and mingle strategy, I think it really push students to engage and have really solid student discourse in order to decide, hey, we're on Team Cameron or Team Jordan. And once they made a decision, you allow them to go through that mix and mingle again for them to then, okay, so now that I'm standing in my stance, let's go compare with someone else. There was an aha moment. I don't know if you caught it with one of your students during that time frame when you did round 2, where one of them was like, you know what? I did this, and this is why. Do you know what I'm talking about? One of your students decided to change their mind?
Yeah, I know whenever we came back together, Karen raised her hand and was actually like, I thought it was this person, but once we talked and they helped me remember the parentheses, now I know it was this person. I was just like, yes.
That's exactly what we want them to
Yes.
do. We want them to definitely reflect, sit in the process, and really figure out, okay, do I have enough evidence to support that I'm either on Cameron's side or Jordan's side, and it's because of going through their process. So I'm glad that she had that aha moment. I think that was a great moment. Also for you too, because that's what we want them to do, right? Become independent thinkers based off of the evidence or whatsoever provided in the problem. So outside of that, you did a great job again with activating prior knowledge. Students did engage in active discourse and discussion, not only with you cold calling and also randomizing, but also talking to each other. I think it was a nice balance of student and teacher talk throughout the entire lesson. And then again, the huge reinforcement piece, the monitor and adjust, to ensure that you address misconceptions head on and that you provide students that additional support through small group instruction before releasing them independently. So the next piece that I kind of want to navigate to is when we go to the elaborate stage, and this is going to be our refinement area. So talk to me about what we did as far as the initial portion of the elaborate stage. What were students expected to do?
So students were given these.
Yes.
But yeah, they were given these. There were three different equations where they needed to add parentheses, or they needed to decide whether or not it needed parentheses, and if so, where do the parentheses go in order to make the equation true? Because most of them, when you run it from left to right, doing the operations, they were all just addition and subtraction.
Yeah.
But when you run it from left to right, it doesn't get the answer in the equation. So they had to figure out where the parentheses go. And that's something that, as far as I know from IQ analysis, they've never been asked to do on STAR, but it shows an understanding that they know what those grouping symbols mean and how they change an expression.
And I think that was another, level of depth of knowledge, like that level 3, level 4, as far as an application piece, and understanding that we have to go through this process in a sequential order in order for us to arrive to the answer. Because you're not solving for the actual answer right now. I'm giving you the answer. How do we get there? So just going through that process backwards. So I think this was an amazing activity for them to dive into. So talk about how you actually facilitated that activity.
So I introduced it to them with a slide on the board, and I passed one of these out to each student group. So my students are in groups of 4.
Okay.
I gave them to the groups. They were in dry erase laminate so that they could actually physically draw the parentheses on the page and erase if they didn't like it and move them somewhere else. And so I gave each group one of these orange cards, and I let them work as a group to try to find the parentheses.
Okay. And do you actually have that slide? I know we were talking about going through your PowerPoint as a part of the lesson.
My computer went to sleep, but it is here. And the slide is basically just the same as the card. It has placed the parentheses, and it has the same 3 expressions on there. Because then when they were done, I asked groups to come show me where they put their parentheses.
Gotcha. So let's talk. So I think this is, once again, a worthwhile activity, definitely aligned to what you would want or expect for students to do looking at your objective. But once again, they're working backwards, right? To test to see if they really understand the process. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about accountability and ensuring that all students actually reach that level, or having mastery checks during that elaboration time frame, right? You did a very good job initially at the beginning of taking that running roster to adjust to see who needed to come to the table, but now we're talking about the actual group work here, and this accountability work is just as important as when they come to you for small group instruction. So how did you, just based off of the card here that's displayed on the screen and the card that's at the table, really identify if students had an opportunity to work through the problems and if they had an opportunity to check or support each other in reaching mastery of those specific problems?
So since it was in groups, they worked together to come to it. So there was not an individual accountability piece in that section. It was more so communicating as a group and coming to a consensus as
Gotcha.
a group.
Okay. And that's a great strategy as
Yeah.
well. But we also want to, especially if they're engaged in group work, that each person in that group has a level of accountability to ensure that they understand what the objective is or the goal is, right? And they also have adequate practice, each person in the group. So we have on average 4 students per group, but 3 questions, right? What could have been a strategy, I guess, to take that to the next level, thinking about accountability to ensure that each student had an opportunity, or that we know for sure that there's some type of evidence that each student was able to work through either a question or all 3 questions?
So they could have, there could have been an additional question, so they each had one, or there could have been a card for each student to sit and do it and then discuss.
Gotcha. And I like both strategies. Thinking about time-wise, probably which one would be a better fit for time?
Probably just an extra one on the card.
Right. So if you have 4 students, 4 problems, right? And then think about it. Each problem is going to be different, so that adds another layer of differentiation and support, right? Because each student is not going to get the same problem, or at least not in their group. And so it's not like they can copy off of each other, right?
Right.
Now, in identifying that piece, so now each person gets a problem. How can we actually support each other through that process? Because you wanted them to work in groups, right? So what could we do as a facilitator move, or maybe an instruction to ensure that they do have support in their groups and they're actually actively discussing? After they've been assigned a card or a problem, what could they do?
They could work through it and then share with their group.
That's it.
Yeah.
So either you could have them pair with each other, partner A, partner B, and that way they both are working on their problem at the same time. And then after about 3 or 4 minutes, they do what? They check each other, right? And they do the same thing for the other side of the table.
Right.
So that way everyone has an opportunity to actually work on a set problem. They're going through the same process, but then they also get some coaching and feedback from their peer, okay? But also support you too while you're at the group table, so you can have that kind of solid time to really work with them while they're still supporting each other, right? Okay. So I think that would be a great idea. Another suggestion potentially could be that you have these numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, seat 1, 2, 3, 4, assign it that way, and they could potentially do a round robin, etc., around the actual table, which is a cadence strategy for them to actually identify, okay, this is what I did in order to get this problem. Do you guys agree or disagree? But I think the partner A, partner B, the rally coach, would be probably the easiest to ensure that within that time that you give them, that they work independently to solve the problem, figure out if they got the correct answer, and then they're able to share with at least one other partner. Okay? And then I'm also thinking about you as far as a teacher and managing like so many problems within a certain amount of time as far as development too. You can use the same card at every different table, and then you can come back and have a whole group discussion on around those same 4 problems as opposed to like 16 different problems. Right? Okay. So what would be our immediate adjustment for this that could really support us?
So just adding another one to this card, and having them assigned. So if that would be if I was doing that again, but in the future with other things, just making sure that if they're doing it in groups, that I have set up some sort of ownership of each piece with students in the group, so that whenever they're discussing, there's not anybody dominating and people just kind of sitting back.
And that was the actual feedback that I was going to share with you. That's what I observed. in at least 3 of the 4 of the groups, there was at least 2 students that were kind of sitting back listening on average at each table and not really participating in actually writing down the actual problem on their whiteboard and working through the process with the other students. And so although it was active participation, we had some that just like they wanted to ear hustle and listen and then just say, yeah, sure. And so that's why I wanted to focus on the accountability piece, because I think this is a great activity, but I just want to make sure every child has an opportunity to engage in it.
Right, and especially in that class, I have quite a few students who just are really good with math. They just get those mathematical relationships, and like I can throw stuff at them I haven't taught them yet, and they can figure it out. And so sometimes I have to be careful, because when I do give group work, they tend to dominate, and I think the other kids at their table know, oh well, so and so knows
he's gonna
this.
automatically do it, right?
They know it, so I'm just gonna listen to him because he's always right.
Right, and we're gonna make sure our table is good because of him sitting right here. Okay. So yeah, I mean, definitely, and we want to, and that's another way to once again monitor airtime too, so that one person doesn't dominate over the other, and everyone is held accountable, and that they know that they're being held accountable, because guess what, Ms. Cove can call on either one of us at that point in time.
Right.
What I would also recommend, that now that we have a process in which students are supposed to engage in these problems, what should they have to also support them in the absence of the teacher while you're working over there at the small group?
They should have some sort of instructions on what to do.
3 or 4 steps, no more than that, just to make sure that they have that support, that pillar right there, so they're not doing what? Teacher.
Yeah.
Ms. Cole?
Yes.
Remember what I said? No. And then guess what? You already put it on the board. So it's not like you have to really create a new card if everyone is working on the same thing. It could be a card here or something that's on the screen that they can refer to. Okay. So once again, I'm just trying to help you to work smarter, not harder, because I'm on your side, I understand. But once again, just trying to figure out how we can take it to that next level of accountability. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's going to be our reinforcement area, as far as, anytime we are engaging them in that group work, just that level of accountability, just make sure that we have clear directions that are simple, no more than 3 or 4 steps, but that it encourages for every child in the actual group to have a specific role. Okay?
Yes.
All right, so that's what we're going to add to your feedback notes as far as the reinforcement area. And then again, that refinement, what did you do so well?
The monitoring and adjusting, and trying to remember what else.
Well, that's the main one.
That's the main one, the monitoring
right?
and adjusting.
Just making sure that you are able to address those misconceptions right then and there as quickly as possible to support students. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to add that to your feedback notes. Are there any additional questions that you have for me?
No.
Okay. All right, so now that we've had an opportunity to talk about your refinement and reinforcement areas, we can now go over your overall ratings in each category. Okay. Remember, this year for T-Tess purposes, we're not giving you an overall rating for observation, but we're actually giving you ratings in each individual dimension. Okay? And so we'll talk about that at this time.
Okay.
All right.